Join me, please, in our affirmation of covenant. It's in your bulletin. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
We have two speakers today, and I'm so happy that Dr. Chad Taylor can join us. I believe he was on call last night, so he's really taken out some special time to be with us today. Dr. Taylor is studied medicine at the University of Texas Medical School. He's been here at UAMS since 2016 as part of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And he's really been advocating for his patients and creating a partnership with them. And that's a very important aspect of his practice. So, Dr. Taylor, the pulpit is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna fix. I think she taught me.
He is teachable.
Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. If you can't, then it's your job to point at me and tell me to speak up. Okay. I have to start off with a disclaimer. I don't speak on behalf of UAMS. And anything that I say today is my personal opinion. I want to thank you for having me here today. I've never spoken in a church before, at least not in a long time. So this is a very unique opportunity for me, and I'm very grateful to be here. I want to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born in Houston, Texas. I grew up in a Lutheran church. At the age of 5 or 6, I told my parents that I didn't like that church because it was boring. So we switched to a Methodist church. It's a bit of a lateral move. When I was 8, I began attending a Baptist school, which had a strong curriculum, but in the 6th grade, I was told that everyone on the planet who has been exposed to the Christian faith and didn't accept Jesus as their Savior would go to hell. I was an astute 11-year-old, so I naturally had questions. Apparently, this included Native Americans. It included people who were subjected to colonization around the world, and people who were born to other cultures. And this just didn't sit right with me, because you see, Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on faith. So while I went to a Baptist school, I prayed in my more moderate Methodist church. My family is Republican, which by definition means they are good people. A middle-class family, they voted for Reagan and Bush, and we have traditional white family values. So clearly I was pro-life because, well, murdering babies is bad. Then I went to college in 1991, and I met a lot of people like myself, but something about them was different. They were also largely middle-class white people, but they had this different way of thinking. These people called themselves Democrats. And because of some very patient people, my entire worldview changed. I wound up doing a 10-year stint in the restaurant industry before making my way to medical school. And I fell in love with OBGYN because of surgery. But it turns out that what I live for is advocating for women and their rights. Because women's rights really are human rights. I want to say that again. Women's rights are human rights. They are the rights of all races and all religions and all sexual orientations. They are the rights of children and the poor and those who cannot defend themselves. Plus, they're the rights of the strong and powerful, because women are all of these things and much more. In my office, I counsel women regarding their pregnancies every day. And when I tell them their babies are small or that there is a benign spot on their ultrasounds, they get so scared and they often cry. Pregnancy is terrifying. And these aren't hypothetical women. They're real. Jennifer is having a child with anencephaly, a condition where the top half of the baby's head just doesn't form. Susan is having a baby with no kidneys, which is a problem because the kidneys make the fluid that allow for lung development. So even if this fetus will be healthy and kick all through pregnancy, when it's born, it will suffocate for sure and die. These choices are impossible. I'm not trying to suggest what Susan and Jennifer should do. I'm trying to give them a choice. But ultimately, the rights of the baby simply cannot supersede the rights of a woman. I am empowered to counsel my patients about cancer and hysterectomies and pregnancy, but the state doesn't trust me or my patients to talk about abortion, mostly because my patients are women. The patient-doctor relationship is sacred except when it comes to abortion. I don't know if there's a God. I certainly don't have overwhelming proof. It's comforting to believe that lives and souls aren't simply extinguished when we die, but who knows for certain? The answer to that question is all about faith. The same faith that my Catholic friends and Muslim friends and Jewish friends have. The faith that gives us peace. What I do know is this: my God would never judge a woman for making this impossible decision. So maybe we shouldn't either. And make no mistake, we all know when life begins. That's why this is difficult. Abortion is never a frivolous choice. But each person walks their own path with God. And we need to find a way to make space for all people to have autonomy over their relationship with God and autonomy over their choices when it comes to their own bodies. I won't ever pass up an opportunity to issue a challenge, so here's one for you. It's great to talk with people who share a similar mindset and worldview. It's easy and it's reassuring. But I challenge all of us to break out of our comfort zones. Let's start having the conversations with people who might not share our views. Let's talk to people from other backgrounds and find some common ground. We all have women in our lives. Sometimes it's the right thing to speak with passion and rally emotions into action. Other times, though, we need to speak with love and understanding, trying to touch others' hearts so they can have compassion. I encourage all of you, every last one, to go vote this year. Take a friend with you, and not one who is going to go vote anyway. Take a new voter with you. Vote with your heart and with compassion. This isn't the time to vote for inflation or COVID. It's the time to vote for human rights. Because they're coming for some of you next. So go get a big group together. Vote for my new friend Kelly. And one last thing, as it turns out, my parents are pro-choice too. I don't think they would have ever chosen it for themselves, but they just don't want to make that choice for others. It's all we're asking for. It's the freedom to choose. Thank you.
Each time I've had the opportunity to be with Kelly Krout, just to spend some time, it has allowed me to get to know her a little more deeply, and I've enjoyed every encounter that I've had with her, and I know you'll enjoy her words today. Kelly is a former foster parent, a social worker, and author of children's books. So again, Kelly, now the pulpit is yours.
Thank you very much. I got excited when we're talking about families up here because I have a very interesting family, and we get a lot of looks when we go out and about because we're just kind of a large group. So my husband and I have 7 children. 3 we adopted out of the foster care system, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we have 4 biological children as well. So it's quite the party when we go out and about. I used to drive an actual bus, like it was a 12-passenger thing. It was a bit of a gas guzzler, but we've split up now that we've got a teenage driver, so we can go places in 2 cars. They're also all boys, which makes it pretty rowdy. So I'm really enjoying my time this weekend with Debbie, where we can just sit and chat. And anyway, it's exciting. It's a good crew. But I'm here in the capacity as a former foster parent, to talk about my experience there and talk about how being part of that process and part of that just experience brought me from a very conservative stance to where I would find myself now. Chad, you and I share a lot in common as far as our childhoods go. I was also raised Methodist and was born and raised in Russellville. And I've got a younger brother and an older sister, and we were involved in our church there, but it was a pretty chill church environment. And we mostly just went on Sunday, and we were just kind of good people. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a real estate agent. And what I saw modeled for me was a very egalitarian marriage. There weren't a whole, my dad would mow, so we had some gender roles. My mom typically cooked, but my dad would clean up dinner. And if he was mowing and ran into a snake, he would come get my mom because she wasn't afraid of him. And I just thought she was so awesome for that. Like, look, my big old dad is so scared right now. But we deferred to women in my house. My dad would talk all the time about, your mother is so brilliant. Your mom is, not ask your mother, like, get out of my way, but ask your mother because she knows more than me. And I just always admired that about him, that he would defer to her that way. I didn't know or particularly care how they felt politically. I wasn't interested in that at the point, but they taught us to think critically and question everything. And if I would ask them what they thought about something, they'd say, well, what do you think? And then we would kind of hash it out. So they really taught us to figure out what we thought on our own. So when I went through a little teenage rebellion, it wasn't the typical teenage rebellion. I got involved in a Super Baptist youth group. And it was a little bizarre for our family. It was a very evangelical, very conservative atmosphere. And I don't know what drew me into it, but I just really absorbed this, and it became like half of my personality. Okay. I was just very, very entranced in this. I met my husband shortly after high school. We were set up on a blind date. I worked at Sonic, and somebody I met there invited me to go out with this guy. And I hesitated, but they were like, he's 6'7". And I was like, that's very tall. And I just really wanted to go out with a tall guy. So it worked out. I was always self-conscious about being tall, and he was so much taller. He made me look short. And I meet people in person all the time who say, you're so much taller than I thought. It's because he's making me look very short in pictures. But anyway, he was also a very conservative guy. We got very involved in the church where he attended, and we worked together in the church nursery. And we cared for a family's children who were doing foster care. And we just fell in love with these kids, and these families were just so precious. And we talked even dating that we wanted to do that when we got married. And we did get married pretty shortly after that. And at the time, there was a rule at DHS that you had to be married for 2 years first before you could foster, which is actually a super great rule. Spoiler alert, they're so desperate for foster homes, that rule no longer exists. So you can foster whenever you want to. But since we couldn't foster when we first got married, we went on to have a couple of biological kids pretty quickly. And I can't really overstate how conservative we were. And I'm going to tell you a couple of embarrassing things here, and I'm going to ask you not to judge me too hard, and we'll talk about why at the end. But I want to be able to show you that people can change, and people do change, and I've seen it, and I've experienced it. We were so conservative that there was a point that I actually felt, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud to y'all, I actually felt that birth control was playing God and sinful. Okay? Not shocking. I had 3 children in 4.5 years. And I started to question this, like, oh, holy smokes. If we keep this up, like, this is going to be a lot. But after we had that third baby, we were at our church service, and they were talking about foster care that day. And it kind of reminded us, like, oh, wait, we said we were going to do that. And that's something we still really cared about doing. And even with 3 little kids, we had the capacity and energy and time and space at that point to be able to do it. Now, we had a bunch of little kids, and so I thought, I can't handle another little kid. Let's take in teenagers. Because, little kids are kind of physically exhausting, and teenagers are more of like a mental energy. So I thought, let's spread out the love there. And so we started fostering a teenage girl. She was 15, and she was amazing, and we had a great time. And this is where I kind of struggle sometimes. I want to encourage people to do foster care because it really is such a rewarding experience. It is such a special thing to get to give children a safe place, get to give them experiences that they might not have otherwise gotten, get to support their families and hopefully reunify, which is 99.9% of the time the goal of foster care. And we just really loved it. That said, I don't want to oversimplify it in my excitement for it because I am passionate about it, but it takes a lot of work and commitment and willingness to get your heart broken and willingness to learn about trauma and adjust your own styles if you're triggering a kid for whatever reason. But this Ashton was her name, and she wouldn't mind me telling you that. And she just challenged us in ways that I didn't expect. I really thought we went into this with the right heart. I thought we want to help these children. But we also went into it with a little bit of judgment about their parents and just very black and white thinking, do the right thing, just don't get in trouble and you won't lose your kids. And like, this is more of the embarrassing stuff that I'm telling you so that you can see some growth, I hope. But I learned watching her family and learning about her experience that it wasn't that they just made bad choices. They didn't have good options to choose from. They were struggling with mental health in their family, and they didn't have access to the resources that they needed. As we went on to foster several more children, saw over and over again how poverty was the initial catalyst to end a child in foster care, and that should never be the reason that a child is removed from their parents. But at the end of the day, when a child doesn't have the resources they need and somebody sees that a child is being neglected in some capacity, the state has an obligation to step in. So we saw over and over again these situations that just weren't as simple as what I thought. I ended up getting pregnant again in this season when we had that teenager. And I started to feel a little panicky. Like, okay, we've got these 3 little boys, we've got this teenage girl. I just felt like something wasn't right with this pregnancy. And I thought, what if something happened to me when Kevin, my husband, had to choose between me and this baby? And up until this point, I would have called myself incredibly anti-abortion, very, very pro-life. That's part of why we were doing this. We were doing the most pro-life of all of the things, right? But it made me start to question what kind of choice I would make, because I didn't want to leave Kevin with all of these children and this foster. He probably would have had to have Ashton go back. Like, there would have been a lot of complications. And it started to challenge, maybe these aren't simple decisions either. And kind of a sad turn of events, I did end up losing that baby and had to deliver at 17 or 18 weeks. And so much past the window that you might think that somebody would lose a baby. And now there wasn't much different that could have happened for me personally, but it also helped me realize, like, wow, I can very easily put myself in the shoes of like one of the women that you mentioned earlier who knows their child is not going to survive and then have to walk through this incredibly traumatic experience of delivering a child you know is not going to make it. And nobody should have to make nobody should be forced to make a decision that they don't want to there. You need to be fully prepared to go into that. And so all these little pieces started just kind of messing with my worldview. And then as we continue to foster other children, just continuing to learn about their family experiences. I think a part of why some of what we see in the abortion conversation is so passionate is because people who came from circles like what I was in were taught that sacrificial love is the only true kind of love. Laying down your life for someone is the only way that you can actually do it. And that's why it was rocking my world during that pregnancy to not actually be willing to sacrifice myself, because I had all these other people that I needed to care for. And so I like to challenge people to meet people where they are when we're having some of these conversations and help understand where they're coming from, because that's what we were taught in that environment, and it made sense that we thought that way. We went on to mostly foster teenagers because we had all these little kids. Shocker, we got pregnant again, and that's how we ended up with 4 of those. And so at one point we had I think it was 5 little boys under 8. So we stuck with those teenagers. And the teenagers were fun. I love the teenagers. And then we got kind of typecast into teenage boys that had been in a little bit of trouble. And this is what started rocking my world about the criminal justice system and how I had been so naively assuming how black and white some of these situations were. One of our boys had a small drug charge that he had missed court for. So he'd been issued a failure to appear warrant. And when you get issued a warrant, your driver's license is suspended. He had fines and fees for missing court. He had fines and fees for the actual charge. It's a $200 reinstatement fee to get your driver's license back. So he needed a job, right? Well, you need your driver's license to get a job, and you can't be driving back and forth on a suspended license. And me and Kevin were just shaking our heads like, how are we even going to help this kid? Like, here we are, 2 educated adults willing to walk alongside this child and help him get in good standing with the law. And it was still a nightmare. And there are so many families that don't have this kind of support. So it was easy to look back at how families would end up in these situations and then not take the right path to get out of it because it's too hard and too cumbersome and too expensive. It was really eye-opening. Thankfully, we had the time, capacity, and energy to be able to help him get in good standing, but it was not without a lot of confusion and learning on a lot of issues. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit more about kind of the sobering truth of foster care. There's such a massive shortage. There's still a massive shortage. At any given point in Arkansas, we're looking at about 4,500 kids in the foster care system, about 1,700 foster homes. And that number is a little bit inflated because it includes provisional homes. And a provisional home is like if one of your family members goes into foster care and you step up to be the foster home, you're not necessarily a trained, licensed foster home yet. You're a provisional home. Okay, so the 1,700 is a little inflated. So there's a huge need. Of these children, about 20% of the teenagers who age out will be instantly homeless. Like 18th birthday, instantly homeless. The statistics continue to get worse as they grow up. In Arkansas, this is kind of interesting. A lot of people don't realize this. You can stay in foster care until you're 21. And our oldest son that we adopted him the day before he turned 21. I was like, sure, you can stay in foster care until the very last day, and then we'll adopt you and you've got a family. But he could use all those DHS resources while he had him. But most kids don't take that. They turn 18 and they're like, I'm out. I'm tired of being shuffled around in a system. So even though there are a lot of benefits to staying in care till you're 21, it's hard to talk kids into doing it. Very few graduate high school. I've seen statistics anywhere from a quarter to half of children in foster care, if they're still in care at that point, are graduating high school. Less than 3% go on to achieve a higher degree, even though something like 60% of them want to. 7 out of 10 girls in the foster care system will be pregnant by the time they are 21. My first daughter, Ashton, is 24 and has 3 children. So I am actually a grandmother, technically. 1 and 2 develop a substance dependence. It's sobering. It's not a simple solution. And after Roe, this part is hard for me because I think these are very separate issues. We have a healthcare issue and we have a foster care crisis. And my adult foster children do not appreciate being, I've talked with them about some of these and they're like, I don't want to be a pawn in this conversation. I don't want to have anything to do with this, because there are a lot of implications in some of these statements. You might be surprised asking an adult foster child, well, would you rather have been aborted? People think it's a real gotcha moment right there. You might not like the answer because these kids have been through a lot. And then there's, they'll just end up in foster care. Well, what's the implication there? That their life didn't matter because it was in foster care? Like, there's just a lot of ways that is really confusing, you can imagine, to a 20-year-old kid who's grown up in foster care. And we've got to be respectful about how we talk about that and respect those stories. That said, I understand that there's some overlap because if we are going to have a massive increase in births, just numbers-wise, we are going to have more children enter the foster care system that is already strapped. Oh, I didn't mention this. So those 4,500 foster kids and the 1,700 foster homes, anyone want to take a stab at who they would like to take in? Babies. Yeah, so we've got a bunch of teens floating around in the foster care, a bunch of middle-aged, children, because people want to take in babies. Of all those children, 4,500, roughly 200 to 250 right now are eligible for adoption. We actually have over 1,000 licensed adopt-only homes waiting for placement. And we've got all these children ready for adoption, but those are not the children that they signed up to adopt. You see what I'm saying? Because they're looking for babies. And so let's say post-Roe, we've got new newborns entering this system. This is not so simple. It's like, oh, we'll just adopt the babies. When you enter foster care, there's a plan, okay? So parents have 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer, to reunify with their kids because reunification is the goal of foster care. Thank you. 99.9% of the time. And so you have to be a foster family to take in those newborns, not an adopt-only family. Adopt-only families are only getting placements of children who have already had their parents' rights terminated. And so no newborn is going to have their parents' rights terminated, so these are going to foster families. Does that make sense? So those foster families are the ones that are going to get the opportunity to adopt those babies. It is not ideal. And this simplification of adoption just makes my heart hurt because am I thankful for adoption? Absolutely. I have adopted. Was it simple? No. Are my kids going to deal with this for their entire lives? Yes. Are their families still grieving? Yes. This is a developmental grieving issue. So at every age, the more you start to understand, the more you have to grasp what's happening. So when my son was 2, he could be like, yeah, I'm adopted. I went to the courthouse, thumbs up. And then when he's 4, it's like, wait, where's my other mom? And then at 10, it's like, can you tell me exactly why? And so they're having to reprocess this grief at every stage for the rest of their lives. And it can be a beautiful and wonderful thing, but we can't ignore the heartbreak in it. We can't ignore the trauma in it. It is not a simple response to abortion. It's not. That is not at all what that is. It's a gross oversimplification. Besides, we're ignoring, pregnancy and childbirth, which is its own traumatic thing at times. I always also like to say, we've all probably saw the draft where it mentioned the domestic supply of infants, which is just a disgusting way of putting that. And I can admire and understand a family's desire for a child. But if someone wants a child, that does not entitle them to someone else's child, period, ever. It is no one's responsibility to do that. Okay. I want to mention a little bit more about how this process moved us from one side to the other, just being exposed to families that were not like ours, seeing how these families really struggled, and these simple things that I thought could have fixed it were not, in fact, as black and white. And so, while skipping over some details, ended up much further on the other side of the political spectrum. And I asked you to be patient with me in the beginning because, like you, Chad, people were patient with me. I asked some really ignorant questions. I said some really ignorant things. I said some really hurtful things. And I thought I was doing the most loving thing. I truly did. I was trying to help and doing the best that I was able in the capacity that I had. And we were able to help a lot of children, whether or not we got into it originally for 100% the right reasons. I also firmly stand by, no one is ever going to change their mind on a topic because you make them feel stupid about it. They're just not going to. They're going to shut down the conversation and step back. So we've got to find a way to bring people into the conversation, add some nuance, add some personal experience that makes it more understandable so that we can meet somewhere and then go from there. I talk with people about this all the time and can almost always find some middle ground where we can agree. And then what's wild is we can actually still fundamentally disagree about abortion, but make progress toward fewer abortions. We don't have to agree on the moral, beginning of whatever to be able to make progress together. So we have to make space for people to be able to course correct and come back in. And I was very admittedly a pretty extreme conservative little young 20s gal who thought I knew everything. And then I've landed on the other side of this and just realizing I was completely clueless. And we'll spend the rest of my life advocating for these populations so that we can do better. I'll end with one of my favorite quotes that I truly, truly try to live by Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. I'd like to just, very last, if you are hearing any of this and you're like, hey, how could I help with the foster care system? Maybe you can open your home to foster, and I would encourage you to do that, and I'd love to talk to you about it. I hear a lot of, what about my biological kids or what about my adopted kids? People get nervous about that. I always say it makes them better people. I got to show our kids on the front lines how we can bring people in, how we can love people, how we can serve them, and we don't have to have any strings attached to it. We can send them back to their families with hopefully some new tools. And when DHS would call me, and they would call me every day, and the kids would hear it and they would know who it was, and they'd be like, why'd you say no? And I'm like, because there's 12 of you in here. But they loved it. They loved being a part of it. But if fostering is not something that you could do, there's something called being an independent living sponsor. So these kids that are aging out, you can sign up to kind of help mentor and help manage their budget and meet with them and help with those statistics toward homelessness and substance abuse. There's an organization here in Little Rock, Immerse, that helps with kids that are aging out as well. Just transitional skills, cooking skills, life skills kind of stuff. You could be a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate, and so they help advocate for the children, and they have access to every piece of what's happening, so they really have eyes on everything. Or a fictive kin is kind of my favorite, and we often see this with teachers, and teachers are the first to step up for this because they know these children. If you're a teacher or anybody in the community, a coach or whatever who knows children, and a child in your care comes into care, you can become a fictive kin foster home. And so it's literally like fictitious family, and you can kind of get a fast track to becoming a foster home so that child can stay in a space that they know. It's especially helpful for teenagers because we have such a shortage of homes that are willing to take teenagers. And so teachers, once again, saving the world left and right. I will be there this afternoon. If you are interested in fostering, you can go to dhsarkansas.gov and check out some of that stuff. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody after. I appreciate so much your willingness to sit and listen to me and not judging me too hard in the beginning, I hope. And just keep the faith that people can change, and we've just got to find the right connection to be able to make that happen. Thank you so much.
Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the suffering, honor all beings. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of commitment, and the joy of community. All right. Go now in peace, and everyone have a wonderful week. Thank you.